Welcome back to Land Matters, the podcast of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm your host, Anthony Flint. Well, we talk a lot about urban planning here on Land Matters and sometimes delve into some technical terms in the field. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive on one word in particular that sounds extra wonky, but is absolutely critical in any discussion of building and real estate development and housing, and that's density. The occasion, as if to say one needs one, is the revival of a Lincoln Institute website called Visualizing Density, which was pushed live this month at lincolninst.edu after some extensive renovations, various tweaks, and updates. Essentially, it's a visual guide to density based on a library of aerial images of neighborhoods across the land taken by photographer Alex McLean, and also features a glossary and other resources. We'll cover more about this online resource in just a moment. But first, let's start with some basic definitions. To be clear, we'll be talking about residential or development density as distinct from, say, population density or employment density. Residential density is understood to be the number of homes within a defined area of land. In the U.S., most often expressed as dwelling units per acre. A typical suburban single-family subdivision might be just 2 units per acre. A more urban neighborhood like Boston's Back Bay might be something more like 60 units per acre or more. So yes, it's a technical term, but a concept that is absolutely central to the future of all our cities and towns. Virtually everything about the discussion of affordable housing boils down to density, and I'm going to take a shot at explaining why. Housing prices are wicked high, with over 50% of the American households' cost burden, that is spending more than 30% of the family budget on shelter. And prices are high in part because demand has outstripped supply. The U.S. needs to build between 3 and 6 million new homes, according to a range of estimates, and in many jurisdictions, zoning and land use restrictions make that hard. So if you accept the premise that we need to build more housing, communities need to change that zoning to allow new construction, but it can't just be single-family homes. Those tend to be pricey and require more land. It's multifamily housing that is generally more affordable, not to mention efficient and better for the environment if it can be located near transit. But multifamily housing, whether it's a duplex or triple-decker or fourplex, 20-unit condo building, a bigger building of 100 apartments or more, that all means greater density. And that's where the tension can arise, because that new zoning generally applies to already built-up areas in and around major cities. Development proposals are unveiled for infill parcels in well-established neighborhoods, and some of the residents nearby are often quite alarmed by the idea of increased density. They worry about traffic and parking and school enrollment and city services, and very often talk about the disruption of the character of their neighborhoods. This is the essential, quite well documented, not in my backyard or NIMBY ethos. Dense development is portrayed as scary. Literally, I've noticed over the years a number of placards and lawn signs depicting a proposed building as a monster with jagged teeth ready to ravage the surrounding neighborhood. Well, the Visualizing Density website aims to help people take a deep breath of sorts and consider what different levels of residential density actually looks like in different contexts. 12 units per acre, 15 units per acre, and on up. We try to provide a sense of how the density actually functions in the neighborhood context, including some of the benefits it typically offers, like being able to walk to things. But it's a tricky thing to talk about, maybe even a little fraught. And while the yes in my backyard or YIMBY camp has been prevailing in many instances, there are still plenty of cases where nervous neighbors are just saying no. To guide us through some of this, we're joined by 2 special guests on Land Matters. David Dixon, who I've described as kind of an elder statesman on the subject of density. He's vice president at Stantec, a global professional services firm providing sustainable engineering, architecture, and environmental consulting services. And Tim Love, principal and founder of the architecture firm Utile, who's been doing a lot of work helping Boston area suburbs plan for greater density. He's also a newly minted professor at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, having recently moved there from Northeastern. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the conversation at Land Matters. And David, let's start with you. Let's step back a bit and understand why more density is in vogue today, or it seems to be popping up more as an issue more regularly. You've made the argument it's the type of housing that today's workforce actually prefers. So it's an economic development argument for places that want to attract those workers. Is that right? And what we're looking at here is the demographic projections, which seem to show that relatively few people want or need a big, spacious single family home. Is that right?
I'm going to start with demographics because our demographics have fundamentally changed. We're in a world where 70 to 80% of net new households, growth in households is the housing market, will be singles and couples without kids. In 2040, literally at most 1 out of 4 US households will include a kid. Right now, 60+% of our total housing is single family detached. Households without kids, who make up the dominant majority of our housing market, are not looking for backyards. Sadly, they're not even looking for good school systems. They're looking for walkability, amenity. That means places to walk to, cafes, beer is right up there, microbreweries, the ability to walk to work. That's really interesting. If you look at the return to work data for actually a great many cities, people who live within a mile or two of their workplace are largely back and happy about that, or they're back most days a week. Most people will walk for about 5 minutes. That's a quarter of a mile. If you can create roughly 1,000 net new housing units, so on top of the markets that there's now, you can bring another block of walkable Main Street to life. You'll have places to walk to, places to find amenity, places to run into friends, places to enjoy community. The number one correlation that you find for folks under the age of 35, which is when most of us move for a job, and anything else, is not wanting to be auto dependent. And they are flocking to the same mixed use, walkable, higher density, amenitized, community rich places that the housing market wants to build. So demand and imperative have come together as sort of a perfect storm to support density going forward.
Is there an ideal density for a given building in an urban context?
So I go back to 1,000 net new units. If you're developing in an area without much there, that's probably somewhere between 30 to 50 units net per acre. That's often in the form of a mix of 5, maybe even 7-story buildings. That's below the high-rise levels, so it's less expensive per square foot to build it, often lined with retail on the ground floor, all the way down to some row houses, even small lot cottages, et cetera. You can have a range of housing types, but it's not that hard to get to this density. And when you hit that density, then walkability, community, amenity spring to life.
Tim Love, you've been helping various towns in the Boston area comply with the MBTA Communities Act, which is a state law that requires cities and towns served by the T to establish districts with a density of 15 units per acre by right. And that usually means a lot of infill, as we were talking about before, building on parking lots, vacant parcels in otherwise built up areas. What are the key elements to make everything sort of fit in?
I think the challenge with the public debate is, first of all, it's always a numbers discussion. Zoning is the primary way that the existing characteristics of neighborhoods were formed in the first place, because most neighborhoods were the result of speculative development, builders building homes for people who then occupied them, at least since the 1930s. And the market always wants to maximize what it can do under a zoning regime. And so if you point to any neighborhood, you can say that it was through private investment gaming the rules as much as possible. So that's an important discussion point to have when you're having these rezoning discussions, which is the zoning has a bigger impact on the character of neighborhoods that are usually at the forefront of zoning discussions than I think people realize when you have these public discussions. I think the other thing that has been a hurdle in this work we've done, and we've helped more than a dozen communities get over the hump with the MBTA Communities Act, is that when you mention multifamily housing to a planning board or the fine citizens of any town in the suburbs, one thing pops in their mind, which is a big 5/1 or 5/2 apartment building that doesn't fit with the rest of their community. the market has decided that's our triple decker today is the 5/1 building. And so when you mention multifamily, it's trigger because of what comes to mind.
Big apartment building.
Yeah, the market doesn't like to build those apartment buildings at any smaller than 120 units. I think part of our education campaign has been to say, hold on a minute. We know what you're all daydreaming when we mention multifamily housing, but there's actually a vast array of choices that actually exist in your neighborhoods in some cases, but might fit better than the big apartment buildings that you're worried about. From the triple decker to the pre-Second World War 12-unit brick apartment building, it might even have a courtyard and just be 3 stories like you find in Brookline or Cambridge. And so a lot of our work with the rezoning has been to educate the public and planning boards that there's a whole other zoological park of choices that maybe we should zone for. I think that was an educational experience for us. I mean, how unusual and rare to have a state law create a kind of hothouse flower-like opportunity to rezone in 12 different communities and actually figure out and learn from those processes what the perceptions are in a region where up until this law was passed, to get any multifamily housing done, you had to get a special permit and negotiate it. So I think that that's one thing to say that's important.
And it's important to note, we're talking about the Massachusetts MBTA Communities Act, but states across the country are engaged in this zoning reform or upzoning for what ends up being greater density. And those smaller buildings that you talked about, it's sometimes referred to as gentle density or missing middle housing. And this is a building maybe, as you mentioned, with 12 or 15 or 20 homes, as opposed to the big building with 200 homes.
That's right. And I think if we look at the logic of the real estate market, discovering over the last 15, 20 years that the corridor accessed apartment building at 120 and 200 units plus optimizes the building code to maximize returns, there is a smaller missing middle type that I've become maybe a little bit obsessed about, which is the 12-unit single stair building. In Massachusetts, and really in most New England states, you can build a 12-unit apartment building with just a single egress stair if it's 3 stories tall. And that is another place that the market is beginning to discover is a good value way to deliver housing. And those size buildings actually fit on a lot of the infill housing. So in a lot of the rezoning we've been doing, we've been making sure that the zoning is pre-organized to receive those kinds of buildings, knowing that when developers are thinking about optimizing returns, they might choose that 12-unit building as one of the solutions. You understand what the market does, which is look for opportunities where typically at code thresholds, either because of construction technology you can use or the number of stairs you can use. And then you can make a case to the market that this is a place where maybe missing middle will work. The design needs to be foregrounded in these discussions, which is what are the design outcomes going to be of different alternative choices about what the regulations are. So in our work, we do very accurate kind of eye-level perspective views of an existing street with a site that has a high propensity for redevelopment because maybe it's vacant or has a single-story commercial building on it. And then we're able to use through comparative views under this zoning set of regulations, this is what the market would do. And so when we draw the after, we pretend like we're the architect for the rapacious developer that's trying to maximize returns under a set of rules. And by explaining that to the multiple publics we talk to, it gets them to understand, and I think in a more sophisticated way, how powerful zoning is and how impactful it is. And so I took this discovery from the MBA to Communities work and actually ran a separate research project with funding from Northeastern University to delve more into these issues with Amy Dane, who's a housing researcher who was a co-author along with one of my colleagues here at UTIL about what the possibilities might be for thinking about zoning with a little bit more of a design lens.
Now, this is the part maybe that's harder to talk about, and that is for a lot of skeptical neighbors, it's not so much the physical appearance of density itself that's the issue. It's what it represents: more people, more crowds, more kids in schools, maybe even too many different kinds of people and incomes. This is arguably what gave us some of the laws in the 70s limiting density in transit suburbs. So there seems to be a little bit of fear or perhaps misapprehension. And that's almost an anthropological exercise, isn't it? It just seems deeply felt, this kind of reaction against more people. And if that's the case, how are architects supposed to change that type of societal mindset?
David's going to have, I think, a more comprehensive perspective on this. But I would say that in many cases, when we've done our recent rezoning work, those arguments are red herrings for NIMBYs who are manipulating the public discourse. For example, I won't name the community. The impact on the schools was a rallying cry in the Facebook pages and the meetings. And the town administrator pushed back and said, "We've lost half the population of our schools in the last 10 years. What are you talking about?" And then other communities where impact on property values was the red herring. And these happen to be the wealthiest communities in the Commonwealth. I think a lot of public discourse, because these are well practiced participants, a lot of what bubbles up isn't at face value. Everybody seems to be, I'm going to sound awfully cynical and I might lose all of my consulting contracts, but I think on the advocacy side, everybody's playing a kind of discursive game here. And so maybe I should stop because I'm going to get myself in trouble and have David fill in here.
Oh, so I get to get in trouble. Okay. When you walk into a room, if you say, let's densify, I will get exactly the reaction that Tim has described. You have to spend time with folks and you have to really work with them to understand what are their goals for their neighborhood and their community, given who they are today. If people can come to see a source of amenity that enriches their lives and frankly improves the value of their property, they become more supportive. That doesn't happen the first time you meet. It might happen the third or fourth time.
There's one other thread I want to ask you about, and that is part of the resistance to density seems to be a kind of a suspicion that developers are just trying to maximize profit by packing in as much as they can. Some critics say that indeed all we see in upzoning is high-end development, not affordable housing. There are different policy responses to this, but I want you to reflect on how do you respond to that criticism of developers sort of cashing in on density? And Tim, let's start with you.
I think, first of all, that's true. Market rate developers will always try to maximize the returns on investment. That's how neighborhoods get built. Neighborhoods are the results of speculative development with the same motivations, at least since the 1930s. The question then is, what policy tools can we put together to make sure that when the market is pursuing maximized returns, the design is good, the density is right, and maybe the private market has obligations to build some percentage of affordable housing with inclusionary zoning.
Inclusionary, that is where a certain percentage of the homes have to be affordable as per the area median income. Is that right?
Exactly. I think the other zoning tool we've been using is to allow projects that have a higher percentage of affordable units, up to 100%, to build taller or to be allowed to capture more density as a way to level the playing field for affordable housing developers, whether they're private companies or community development corporations. So I think the only tool at our disposal to get more workforce in affordable housing is to come up with policies that either incentivize affordable housing developers or require the private market to do its fair share.
It is not expensive and not complicated to figure out the actually very transparent economics of development. You know what the land cost, you know what development's going to cost, you know what rents or sale prices it will command, you know whether there will be a gap or not. You also know that what a developer really has to do is provide a return that will attract financing. It's not so much that they take some big profit off the top of each unit or whatever. They have fees, et cetera. Like it's a job like the rest of us have, and they're attracting investors. And you know what return they need. If you're going to have any investment, you know what profit you have to allow. Other than ADUs, the only way that I have been able to figure out how to provide affordable housing for any of the projects we've worked on is to find a source of public investment. We cannot build housing that's affordable if the land is free, that certainly helps, but that's public investment. What we really have to do is get honest with ourselves and figure out where these dollars are going to come from at scale to address the affordable housing challenges we have, which years ago in Cambridge actually went up to 200% of area median income, and still for most communities today is, up to maybe 150%. And the solution, I believe, lies in the fact that when you build, according to Smart Growth America, who do a lot of pretty good research, they have a mission here, but their research is pretty reliable, that housing that is walkable in a mixed use environment and amenitized is generally worth, whether it's for sale or rental, and in virtually every market that they've tested and researched across the US, which is quite a lot of them, about 30 to 40% more per square foot. If we have policies in place so that value doesn't all go to the underlying land and we can tap those premiums, that is a way to finance affordable housing. In other words, when we use density to create places that are more valuable because they can be walkable, mixed use, lively, community rich, amenitized, all these good things, we kind of probably owe it to ourselves to tap some of that value to create affordability so that everybody could live there. The number of folks living in U.S. suburbs at or near the poverty line is up by more than 70% since the year 2000, because as more of us, because we don't have kids and for lots of other reasons, want to live in great urban places and places where we can walk to cool things and have access to transit and all the great stuff that we would all, I think, support, we push those prices up. And we push the folks out who might have been living there to housing they can afford. And believe me, prices drop the further you are from the core of any region today. If you have been forced out to a suburb without transit because urban prices have risen and we haven't taken the responsibility to tap some of the value creation to pay for urban affordable housing.
Okay, final thoughts. Your hopes and dreams for density going forward. I picture kind of an incremental process where sort of one parcel at a time filling in almost in a kind of a subtle way that places will become really just more of an extension of the traditional neighborhood design that's been there for so long. Do you see it unfolding that way, or what are your hopes for density going forward?
I think I'm optimistic relative to the vision you just painted, which is when we did the research and did this single stair housing report with the Joint Center for Housing at Harvard and Boston Indicators, we ran a GIS kind of spatial analysis to figure out how many missing middle sites there were within a quarter mile of transit in the greater Boston area, using the same data sets we were using for our zoning work. And we plugged in a very low density into our model to help discover where those sites were that had a higher propensity for redevelopment at 0.1 FAR, which is very low. The code for this spatial analysis took out sites that were too skinny or were weird shapes. And we discovered there were 5,000 sites that were perfect for a 12-unit building. So 5,000 times 12 is a lot of housing on these missing middle sites you're talking about. And I think what's important is to get the word out about that. I agree with David that in a lot of neighborhoods, there's no place to develop and ADUs are the answer. But if we came up with 5,000 sites within walking distance of a transit stop, that's a pretty good story to get out and a good place to start. So I think it requires, an education campaign, but these sites are out there, they're in the right place, the right zoning can unlock them. And this is with the existing building code of only allowing 12 units around a single stair building. So I think more work has to be done to dig into the economics, dig into the building code, what the development market is looking for, how you can get financing for a project of that scale. I think we might be able to move the needle here.
David Dixon and Tim Love, thank you for joining the conversation at Land Matters and talking all about density. Now, the big reference point here for this show is indeed the website, Visualizing Density. If you're ready for it, the URL is lincolninst.edu/data/visualizing density. And while you're there, lincolninst.edu, you can click around and learn all about our work in urban planning, organized mostly under the impact area land and communities. Join our mailing list if you like. Also on social media, the handle is @LandPolicy. And of course, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to the Land Matters podcast. For now, I'm Anthony Flint, signing off until next time.